Thank you very much. It's our great pleasure today to present to you the PermaMeteoCommunity project, with which we yesterday had the great pleasure of winning the Frederik Paulsen Arctic Academic Action Award. And this is a project about developing a permafrost and meteorological climate change response system to build resilience in Arctic communities. So what we're going to do today is give you briefly the motivation and tell you a bit about what is in this response system. Permafrost obviously is quite widespread. It covers about 20% of the terrestrial parts of planet Earth. And if you go high north to the high Arctic, like Svalbard, it will be widespread all over the landscape outside the glaciers. I'm sure you all know, but permafrost is defined as permanently frozen ground. This means ground frozen for more than 2 years in a row. And on top of the permafrost, we have the active layer. This is the layer that is thawed in the summer and frozen in winter. And this is what can be active when we deal with climate change, even more active. So we can have longer periods of time when sediments can move on slopes. We can also have thicker active layers that also give us more likelihood for sediments to move. So this is actually what this project is looking after. We want to take you to Longyearbyen. We live in Longyearbyen, around 2,400, 500 people on permafrost. And you can see that we are living in a quite narrow valley with steep mountain slopes. And it's obviously from these slopes that there's a possibility for sliding to happen. And now we will go back in time. Exactly today, 6 years ago, in October 2016, there was an extensive event. Just 20 millimeters of high-intensive rain caused what you're looking at on this photo. So you can see that the main road was actually blocked by mud, and that came down through a detachment of the active layer. And then you may wonder, what happened in 2016? Why would we have this situation? When we look at the data from the temperature, you can see that as we come from summer to autumn, we had to come all the way into the end of October to actually get freezing temperatures. And at the same time, we got a rainstorm with 18 millimeters of rain, and later one with 42 millimeters of rain. At that time, the local authorities had contacted our institution and us as scientists and asked us, can you please make sure we understand how much water is coming into the community? Because these measurements, as you can see, come from the local airport, which is not exactly where we're living. We did so, and you can already see from the numbers from here and here that there's a correspondence in the first event, but in the second event, we actually recorded almost double amount of precipitation in the valley as opposed to the airport. And this is important. We also looked at the intensity of rain, and you can see that the intensity, even in the small rainstorm, was more than 2 millimeters per hour, which is the limit for detaching, for activity to happen. So what was the result? It looked like this exactly 6 years ago. And you can see that large amount of material has actually detached from up here and traveled 200 to 300 meters down the slope, forming a big globe like this, 5 meters thick, 5,000 cubic meters, and just 20 meters away from the local cemetery. Afterwards, even more water saturated the ground and flowed across the road. This was what you saw in the photo before. And in the second rainstorm, not so much happened, but you can see on this slide over here that we have detachments on a small hill and then sediment moving as a lobe into the dockyard that we have in that area. The dogs were evacuated, I should say, but so were some of the people. And that was because the authorities were worried about the size of the second rainstorm, knowing what happened in the first one. And this is at the time when we as scientists understood we need to use our science, we need to build better monitoring systems, observation systems, so that we can better predict and not have to evacuate too many people.
I'll continue by showing you some climate data. In these two graphs, we can see a time series from climate models showing how the climate has been developing throughout the last 100 years or so. The black lines, they indicate temperature and precipitation. The red lines are the same but into the future for the 3 next decades. We can see that from the 80s or so and until today, the temperature has been going up by about 3 to 4 degrees, as many have said before. This does not only impact the Arctic, but also the rest of the globe. The same can be said about precipitation. It's just been going up. If we continue along these lines, in the worst case scenarios, we will have this increase continuing, and the events that Hanne talked about, that were maybe unusual at the time, they will become the new normal. This means we need to take an action today. Our action, local in Longyearbyen, but building an example for the rest of the Arctic as well, is to build a climate change and permanent response system. We are instrumenting the slopes around Longyearbyen where the processes that Hanne just described are happening, with weather stations measuring temperature and precipitation. In addition, we have permafrost boreholes that we already actually installed many of, measuring temperature in the ground. We co-locate these instruments. We can see directly the impact of the atmosphere on the permafrost below it. In addition, we instrument some of the buildings in town with temperature sensors under them, so we can monitor where people live, where the buildings and important infrastructure are, how the climate change is impacting them directly. We have, thanks to the award, also been able to extend this project. We now have the possibility to include satellite data, remote sensing on the slopes, very high resolution, hopefully in future also on an operational basis, where we can monitor these changes as they're happening. We also have funding now to implement a very high resolution weather model, unprecedented high resolution for the Arctic, where we can actually get data that resolve the processes on the slopes. This does not exist in the Arctic today. So we have the data collection system that I just described to you, facilitated by close collaboration with the Svalbard Integrated Arctic Earth Observatory System, SIOS, and the local government in Longyearbyen. So we also use existing observations to implement in the data that the local government for now just have stored at their location. This all should go into an online data portal that we will develop at UNIS in close collaboration with the local community, where we will get live feed of data, real-time data, and this data flow is going to be facilitated by a local telecom company called Telenor. So that's one of the partners in our project. This data, it should be used and available for better decision-making by the local authorities that are integrated into our project in preparedness situations, such as those that Hanne described. We will also use the data in our research and education. And also we will use it for safety science, for example in Arctic Safety Center at UNES. We educate the future generation of the Arctic experts at UNES, and these students come to us, they learn from this system among others, and they export that together, they take it with them back home. So we are not isolated in the Arctic, as I said, and importantly, we built an example and a case in Longyearbyen. We have the resources, and we do so for the rest of the Arctic, also living in permafrost places, which are indicated by the shading on the map. Every dot here is an Arctic settlement living under similar conditions to Longyearbyen, and this amounts to 7 million people or above that. So it's not just a little amount of people here. In about more than 1,000 settlements, a lot of them being indigenous settlements. We will distribute our knowledge and share it, for example, through the EU-Arctic network and other networks that we are actively involved into. So tonight, please join us in our winner sessions for the Frederik Paulsen Arctic Academic Action Award at Esja Harpa on the 5th level from 15:55 to 16:50 today. There's not much time for discussion here now, but please come and see us there, and we are very happy to discuss how we can take our system and bring it to the rest of the Arctic together with you. Thank you.